This morning I will be reading from the book of Leviticus, Leviticus chapter 9. Leviticus chapter 9. In Leviticus chapter 9, before I read a couple of verses from the book of Leviticus 9 and then 2 or 3 verses from Leviticus 10, let me tell you that this has been a very, very difficult message for me to outline. Normally, when I go to the Bible, I like to organize the sermon. That may be a surprise to some of you, but I do try to organize my thoughts and put them in 1, 2, 3, 4 order. But it has been very, very difficult to do so with this message. So what I'm going to do is just do the best I can. I hope that at the conclusion of our message and lesson today, you'll be able to have made some sense out of it, because I think that this is a tremendous lesson. It's more of a lesson than it is a sermon. If that's possible for something to be more of a lesson than is a sermon, every sermon should be a lesson. I guess every lesson should be a sermon, so maybe I'm safe there. But it's a little different for me, at least, and it's been extremely difficult to outline it. There is a tremendous principle, and I've thought about this passage of Scripture for years. I know generally what the principle is that is taught here, and I have been blessed by it and encouraged by it and stimulated because of it. And I never really have preached on it as such, a sermon devoted just to this principle. So I thought maybe I ought to. And then when I sat down to try to organize it, it's difficult. So I'm going to just try to teach you something today with the help of the Lord. Now, the Jews were in Egypt for 430 years, right? Now, if you'll follow me, now you've got to pay attention to me. Now listen to these details. The Jews were in Egypt 430 years, right? And under the orders and command of God, Moses was sent to lead the Jews out of Egypt, where they were slaves. He brought them out of Egypt and took them in the direction toward the promised land. Just before they were to enter the promised land, the people showed a tremendous potential for lack of faith and obedience to God. And in judgment for that lack of faith and disobedience, he turned them away from the promised land when they were about ready to enter into it. And he sentenced them with a judgment of 40 years of wilderness wanderings. And the sentence was to be lasting as long as that unbelieving generation lived. And for 40 years, the Jews stayed in the wilderness until the next generation, or the children of that unbelieving generation, were raised, and the unbelieving generation had died, teaching a tremendous lesson that you don't enter the promised land except through faith. You understand? Now that's what that was all about. So the pronouncement of God's judgment served 2 purposes at least. It brought judgment for unbelief, and it taught the tremendous lesson that the only way you get into the promised land is through faith. And of course the promised land is a picture of heaven. The only way you get to heaven is through faith in Jesus Christ. So that generation was to stay alive until the last one died, and then they were to go into the promised land. Well, for 40 years they stayed in the wilderness, awaiting the ending of that sentence, of that judgment for unbelief upon that generation. It also gave God opportunity to develop the Jews as His people. Now don't ever get it in your head that just by virtue of birth somebody is automatically God's people. It takes time. Now you can be God's child, but to be identified as one of God's people is another thing. So God used this 40 years as a time to develop these Jews as His people. Now, He developed them in 3 or 4 different ways. he developed them into a political body. Politically, they were developed and cultivated. Then he developed them in another aspect. He developed them socially, how they were to get along with one another and how they were to get along with other people. So he developed them socially. Then he developed them religiously, or we should say spiritually. So politically, socially, and spiritually. The political setup that God ordained for the Jews to follow was a theocracy. God established, first of all, the principle of leadership, and he ordained the office of leader. And God not only established the office of leader, but he's the one who chose the leader and put that person in that position of leadership, and Moses was that one. For over 500 years, the Jews continued to have that political setup. The position of leader was established by God, and God chose and placed the one he wanted as leader over the Jews in that office. That was not changed until long after the Jews had gone into the land of promise, and up until the days of Samuel and Saul, when the people came and demanded and said, "We want a king like the other nations." And God then gave them a king, and then the Jews politically became a monarchy. Up until that time, they were a theocracy, with God as their head, with the God-appointed leader directing the political affairs of the Jews. Do you understand that? Now you say, what's that got to do with it? Well, I'll show you a little bit later on. Now the next thing God did, he developed them socially. God said, all right, now this is what you're going to do. This is how you treat one another. And this is what I expect you to do. So he laid down a moral law. And you can hardly divorce their social development from their religious development, or their spiritual development. Because along with their spiritual development, God gave these moral laws and said, now these are the laws that I give to you that shall conduct you morally. And these laws will affect your conduct. Now here's the thing you want to learn. It is well nigh impossible to divorce a nation's organization religiously from a nation organized socially. A nation or a people's religious attitude will determine their social conduct. Do you understand that? What state people are religiously or spiritually will determine what kind of a state they are socially. So it can safely be said that a people's religion determines what kind of people they will be socially and morally. So in the development of the Jewish people socially, God instituted certain religious laws. Now, when you go through the book of Leviticus, God will institute some laws, for instance, social laws regarding hygiene. And he will tell, and I don't mean to be indiscreet when I say this, but it will help you to understand it. He said to the Jews, now each of you will fashion a wooden paddle. That word wooden paddle literally means wooden shovel. And they didn't have metal, so they had to make the shovel out of wood. And there was no sewage system. So when it came to this matter of sewage disposal, do you appreciate what kind of a problem disposing of human waste was involved? Because there were about 3 to 3.5 million of these Jews. Can you appreciate that? And they're all out there walking through the wilderness. They were living. Sometimes they would pitch their tents and would stay in one place for an extended period of time. So God said, all right, now this is what I want you to do. He said, you get a wooden shovel, and every time you go to relieve yourself, you dig a hole, you use it, then you bury it. Well, you say, big deal. No, it is a big deal because the Egyptians didn't know to do that. Do you understand that? The Egyptians didn't know to do that. In fact, it has been my experience that a whole lot of people in the Arab world that still don't know how to do it. I say that kindly, but I remember going through J-Rash one time, and honestly, you had to be careful where you walk. We were up at Damascus, and we see people right out in public relieving themselves. And leave it. One time we stepped off, I don't want to discourage anybody from going to the Holy Land, but one time we stepped off the bus in Cairo, Egypt, and I looked down and I said, hey, whoa, move this bus just a little bit more. I mean, now, can you imagine that sort of thing going on? Lack of sanitation and good lessons of hygiene in a tropical atmosphere and the breeding of disease and germs, particularly in Egypt. You know, God cursed the land of Egypt with flies. When you go there, sometimes you think the curse is still in effect. Many of the Egyptians, you walk down the street, you see them, they have eye problems, either blind or eyes in one eye blind, crossed eyes, all kinds of problems. And if you ever notice sometimes in some travel log shown on TV, they'll take you to Egypt and they'll show pictures of children and flies crawling all in their eyes. Have you ever seen that? Right. Well, you know where those flies have been before they got in the eyes? You understand? So those flies walk around on animal waste and human waste and go crawl in people's eyes. They just don't know about that. Well, I tell you that to show you that God said, now these are the laws of hygiene. Now he said that the laws of hygiene and health were to be administered through the Department of Religion. Now he said, I'm going to get to that in a minute, as God organized the people politically and established the head, and the office of leadership was not only as political leader, but also a spiritual leader, and that person was Moses. So it was very difficult for the Jews to separate the political leader from the spiritual leader, because without spiritual leadership, God said there was no political leadership. But then to further organize it, he organized the Department of Religion, so to speak. And he said, now Aaron, Moses' brother, will be the head of the Department of Religion. And under the Department of Religion will be the health department. And the priests will be the ones who will be the bureaucrats in the health department. It's a strange thing that originally, as God set it up, the health department was a branch of the religious department. And it was the priests who administered all of the duties and responsibilities and the laws of the health department. Today in our society, the health department and the bureaucrats of the local government come to the church and tell them how to operate. Kind of a reversal. So he set up this thing, and this is what he said. Now, along with that disposal of human waste and sanitation and sewage and that sort of thing, he said, you cover it up. Then he said, now here's what else you do, and I'm just hitting on these two. As you go through the book of Leviticus, you'll see there touching dead bodies. You'll say, now, here are the rules for touching dead bodies. He said, if a person dies, the nearest relatives are the only ones who can prepare that body for burial. If a mother dies, the husband and the children may touch her body in preparation for burial, but the in-laws may not, and the grandchildren may not. And he said, now, well, I'm not going to get into it, but anyway, just the nearest relatives. Everybody else don't touch that body. Then he said, after the body has been prepared by the proper nearest of relatives for burial, Then he said, those who have touched the bodies must go and wash their hands, wash their clothes, bathe their body, and if they used pans and pots and that sort of thing in the preparation of bread, they must be thoroughly cleansed. You know what he was doing, don't you? You see, the Jews had no concept of germs, but God did. We did not know the existence of germs even as late as the Civil War. Sterilization of operating instruments and bodies and hands and clothing and all that stuff, they didn't even know about that. More soldiers died of infection from wounds and operations in the Civil War than died on the battlefield. They'd take a saw off a fellow's leg and lay it down on a table. If somebody knocked it off on the table, they just pick it up off the floor and saw on the next guy. They never washed, never did anything. They didn't know anything about germs. That came within recent history. So they didn't know anything about germs, but God did. And God said, now listen, you sterilize yourself. So that was all involved in these laws that you read in the book of Leviticus. And you read it, it begins to get burdensome and a little monotonous. And you know, what in the world? Well, they did not know, but God did. So he said, now these are the Levitical laws. You understand that? Okay. Now, under the Department of Religion, some using a vernacular that all of us understand, he said, all right now, Moses is going to be the political and spiritual leader, and then I'm going to appoint, God said, Moses' brother Aaron, and Aaron's going to be in charge of the Department of Religion. And under him, he's going to have his family, the sons of Levi, because, you see, of the 12 sons of Jacob, one was named Levi, and God ordained that the descendants of Levi would be the priestly line. They would be the ones who would administer all religious rites and ceremonies. And they would be the priests before God and for the people. And they were the tribe of Levi, called the Levites. And because we have the rules for the Levites to follow in this book, to which our attention is drawn now, that is why it's called the book of Leviticus. You understand that? You understand that? Okay, Leviticus. The rules for the Levites, the priestly tribe, who are in charge of the Department of Religion in this development of the Jewish people politically, socially, religiously, or spiritually. All right, now, here, the Levites are told what to do, and all the instructions are there for them to follow. Now, the governmental setup or organization of the Jews was a theocracy. God was the center of that government. Everything revolved about God. The very foundation of the life of the Jews was based in religion and their relationship to God. Everything they did, everything that they were to obey, every thought, every edict, every directive, every law was definitely religious, and it was the foundation of their life. God then set up the priesthood through the Levites. He had the leader. He had the persons responsible for the religious direction of the people. But then the next thing he did, he established the center of their religious culture. And the center of their religious culture revolved about the place of worship. And the place of worship was designed and called the tabernacle. Now, the word tabernacle means tent. portable, temporary dwelling. The Jews were on their way from Egypt to the Promised Land. They were in that journey for 40 years. During that 40 years, they lived as nomads. They never took up permanent occupancy and permanent residence until they got to the Promised Land. Once there is when they then built houses with foundation and stone walls and fixed roofs. For 40 years of their history, they never had a permanent house. They all lived in tents. They were not agricultural people in that they did not till the ground for 40 years. What they needed, they bought from surrounding tribes and nations and people. They bartered what they had for their foodstuffs. Once they got into the Promised Land, they began to till the soil and they became farmers. Once in the Promised Land, the tabernacle, this tent, remained as the focal point of their religious worship. Eventually, that tabernacle was replaced with a permanent building during the days of Solomon, and that permanent place of worship then became known as the temple. Though it was far grander than the tent, magnificent and beautiful to behold in all of its permanence, it still basically was patterned after the likeness of the tabernacle. You understand that? Now, permanence on the part of the Jews did not take place until after they got into the Promised Land, so that all during this 40 years of wilderness wanderings, they had the identity of nomads, living in tents. That is why this place of worship, this center of religious worship, was called the tabernacle or the tent. God gave specific orders how He wanted that tabernacle to be built, the kind of material to be used, where it was to be used, how it was to be fashioned, was given in explicit detail and carried out to the letter. And the reason God said, now I want it done this way, and I want it put here, and I want it always to done this way, was because there was tremendous religious symbolism attached to everything the Jews did. Everything they did, God wanted to remind them of their relationship to Him, including the construction and erection of the tabernacle. For instance, the boards that went into the floor of the tabernacle were to be overlaid with gold. Each board had its specific place, and the boards were fastened with silver pegs, and the silver pegs were driven down into the soil and anchored the tabernacle. When the tabernacle was dismantled for transport, the priest would come in and they knew which board to take out first, where that board should be stored, how to take everything down, put it in its proper place. Then they would move to the next place, and if they were to stay there for a while, then they had their instructions how to take out each board, each bolt of cloth, all the hangings, the trimmings, and everything, because everything had to be done exactly. Now, you understand that? Remembering that every bit of instruction had to be carried out exactly because there was religious and spiritual symbolism attached to everything. In fact, and there were pieces of furniture. There were a few pieces of furniture that were used in the tabernacle, and they were objects where special religious ceremonies took place. The very outline of those pieces of furniture form a cross. Now that's not accidental. That was deliberately outlined by God to remind the Jews that someday upon a cross, the sacrifice would be given for man's sin. So that every time the Jews followed through this religious service, they were to be constantly reminded of the spiritual significance of every aspect. Now, God said, this is what I want you to do. Build a tabernacle. This is the kind of material I want you to use. This is the way I want you to make it. This is the embroidering and the design that I want, the hangings and the coverings inside. This is the board dimension. This is the material. This is the place. And he had it all so meticulously outlined. And when you read the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus, you read all of that stuff, and honestly, it gets boring. But this is the Word of God, and God does not say anything He does not mean. And God does not just put something in the Bible to put something in the Bible. The greatest single thing that you can get from this, what looks like to be monotonous reading in the book of Exodus and Leviticus, is this. God is exacting. God wants it done His way. And it must be followed His way. Now, what does all that teach us? One great, tremendous lesson. God is trying to teach His people that there is a way to do it, and it is His way, and there is no other way. And the reason why God had to put so much of those details in the Bible and be so explicit in all of that design was because man's way. You understand that? God knew that if He did not, with exacting detail, give the designs for the construction and erection of the tabernacle and for the various demonstrations of their religious service, if He did not give them to them exactly, somebody would come along and say, hey, wait a minute, let's do it this way. And the way that would be suggested would come out of an unregenerated heart. And it would be done not to worship God, but to exploit God and to promote humanism or man's way. Do you understand that? And that still is true today. There was one opening into the tabernacle. The tabernacle was a tent. Around the tent was a wall built of a curtain material. It wasn't a permanent wood or block or stone wall. It was a temporary wall made of cloth that could be easily taken down, folded, packed, and moved to the next place. But there was a wall around showing that there was no way into the tabernacle except through the one opening. And that one opening was the only penetration into the tabernacle. Jesus said, I am the door. No man cometh to the Father but by me. You understand that? When he said, I am the door, he was drawing upon the religious knowledge of those Jews of the only door in the tabernacle through which a person may pass to get into the place of the Holy of Holies, the presence of God. And Jesus said, anybody who tries to come any other way is a thief and a robber. Now you stand up today and say, there's only one way to heaven, and that's through Jesus Christ. And somebody says, you bigot, you narrow-minded Baptist. Because everybody else in his religion has his own religion and consequently has his own idea and way to get to God. But God said, one way, Jesus Christ. And he spelled it out in the construction and erection of the tabernacle. Now, do you understand that? You understand that? Now, having understood some of that, and the everlasting infernal insistence of humanity to do it its way instead of God's way, let us pay attention to what we have here for us today. All right, now, the orders had been given how to construct the ark. And the workers proceeded to put all of these articles together. And they built the ark. And God said, all right, now, take what you've done and erect the ark. So they set it up. And in Leviticus chapter 9 is the first time the ark was ever set up. And here it is, brand new, set up for the first time. And God said, all right, and if you look there in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 1, and it came to pass on the 8th day, that is 7 days of setting it up, 7 days in preparation for this big day. Came to pass on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel, and he said unto Aaron, take thee a young calf, first sin offering, ram, burnt offering, so forth. Verse 5, and they brought that which Moses commanded before the tabernacle of the congregation. All the congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord commanded that ye should do, and the glory of the Lord shall appear unto you. And Moses said unto Aaron, all right, now Aaron, you go unto the altar, offer thy sin offering, thy burnt offering, and make an atonement for thyself and for the people, and offer the offering of the people, and make an atonement for them as the Lord commanded. So verse 8 goes on, and he brings this offering, and it goes into some detail there that seems a little bit boring. He took the kidneys, and took the caul, and took the head, and took the tail, and took the entrails, and all that stuff, did everything he was supposed to do, and finally brought the carcass and laid it up on the altar, the brazen altar. Incidentally, that one entrance into the tabernacle, just as soon as you came into that one entrance, that door of the tabernacle, that curtain wall around, tent in the middle of it, the first article of furniture that you came to was this brazen altar. Brass in the Bible always speaks of judgment. It was an altar. It was an altar of sacrifice. This is the lesson. There's only one way to God. You come through the door. That's Jesus Christ. But you do not take another step toward God once you come to Jesus Christ until you do something about the judgment of your sin. You understand that? They had to, right then and there, as they came into the door, offer a sacrifice to show that their sin was worthy of death and payment must be exacted. You understand? And that's what's taking place. This is the first sacrifice to be offered upon this brand new brazen altar that has been built according to the specifications God gave, and it's now set up. So Aaron and his sons go through the ritual. All of that is symbolic. The sacrifice is then brought, laid on the altar. Moses and Aaron then turn, and they walk toward the tabernacle. They step inside the tabernacle, and then come out of the tabernacle and are standing there with all of the Jews assembled. Imagine 3 million, 3.5 million Jews all assembled. And as they stood there, a most phenomenal thing occurred. Moses said to Aaron, this is the thing which the Lord commanded that ye do, and the glory of the Lord shall appear unto you. And as Moses and Aaron turned, looking out over the people, and looking at the people, they looked over the brazen altar with the sacrifice already laid up there. The glory of the Lord appeared. And this is what happened. Out of the clear blue sky, unannounced, and I'm certain, unprepared, a bolt of fire flashed across the heavens and directed itself to the altar, and all of a sudden, zap! Fire flew from heaven, hit that altar, started the fire, burned up the animals' carcasses as they lay there. And when the people saw it, they fell down with their faces to the ground. Look in Genesis 9:23. And Leviticus 9:23. Leviticus 9:23. And Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the people. And there came a fire out from before the Lord and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. Okay, you got the picture thus far? You got the picture thus far? First day the tabernacle set up. First day the sacrifice is to be offered. First day the altar is ever to be used. First day everybody's there. First day for the beginning of this religious schedule, this development of the people of God spiritually. The first day they're all established. The fire came down from heaven and lighted the fire on the altar. Now I want you to go to chapter 16. Chapter 16 and verse 12. Now this is coming right into the middle of some other instructions, but it serves the purpose of what I want to show you this morning. And he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord. From off the altar before the Lord. And he shall take coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord. Now, the priest was to take fire and light incense and put it in a little censer pot, and they had a chain on it. And that incense would burn, and the sweet-smelling smoke of that incense would go up, and the priest would wave it as he went into the tabernacle. Remember I told you that everything had heavy symbolism. As the smoke went up, it symbolized prayer. Sweet incense symbolized sweet prayers inhaled by God and pleasant to God. People coming to God in prayer, God likes that. It's a sweet smell to Him. He's pleased with people who come to Him in prayer, because when you come to God in prayer, it is a picture, it is an indication of your relationship with God, that you and God are on speaking terms. You understand that? You understand it? Come on. Do you understand it? Say yes or no. Okay, I thought you did. Just want to make sure you're with me. Okay, so there is the incense. That's symbolism. All right, now, did you notice something? If I was to ask you, did you notice something? Did you notice anything? Yeah. What did you notice, Dave? Okay, that's right. Where were they to get the fire to put in the incense pot, to light the incense, to send the smoke up? as a symbol of their prayer. Where are they supposed to get the fire from? From the altar. Is that right? All right, now, let's go to chapter 6 and verse 13. Now, in preparation for the setup of the tabernacle and the altar, God gave these instructions. Chapter 6, verse 13. The fire shall ever be burning upon the altar. It shall never go out. Do you understand that? And did you know there were priests assigned the specific task of just making sure that fire never went out. When the coals began to get a little dim, they'd put more wood on it. When they took the tent and knocked it down and packed it for transport to go to another locality, there were priests. And you remember reading in the book of Leviticus about the shovels and the pans? Those were what we used to have. When I was a kid, they were coal scuttles. What do we call them? Scuttles, not scuttles. What was it? Scuttle, was it? Oh, well, you know, you put coal in it. Well, that's what they did. They'd rake the coals off the altar, put them in the pan, and these priests assigned that responsibility would carry those coals and that fire, and every day they'd check it to make sure that it was still burning, and they'd put more fire in it, and they'd keep on going until they came to the next place. They'd set up the tabernacle, put the altar there, and then they'd rake these coals and this fire, and then they'd put wood there to keep the fire burning, because God said, it shall never go out. You understand that? So the fire was never to go out. It was always to keep burning. And any time a priest was to light a fire with regard to the worship of God, the fire had to come from the fire on the altar. You understand that? Now, where did this fire originate? It originated in heaven. It was a fire from God. And they were to keep the fire from God blazing and burning forever. And if they were to use fire in any way in the worship of God, they had to go get fire that originated from God. Do you understand that? All right, now look at chapter 10. Leviticus chapter 10. And verse 1. Well, let's look at verse 24. Leviticus 9:24. And there came a fire out from before the Lord and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. And Nadab and Abihu, two priests, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord, fire from off the altar, blazed in a leaping tongue from the altar, and burned Nadab and Abihu, and killed them. They're just dedicating the tabernacle. And the first day they dedicate the tabernacle, they got two corpses laying there. And these aren't just ordinary corpses. These are the corpses of Nadab and Abihu, second in rank to Aaron, Aaron's own sons. First day you go to church, two people killed. How'd you like to go to that church? You understand? All right, now watch this. Verse 3, Then Moses said unto Aaron, This is that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Aaron couldn't say anything. Can you imagine a man who sees two of his sons dead, and he can't say anything? He can't find fault, can't criticize, can't complain. He just stands there without saying a word. Notice the use of the word strange fire. You know what that means, strange? That word strange has the connotation of an alien, foreigner, or stranger. Strange fire means it was fire put in the incense pots to light their incense as a symbol that their prayers were going to heaven and that they were in fellowship with God. The fire to light that incense did not come from the altar. Somebody struck a match or loaned them their cigarette lighter. But it was not fire that came from the altar. Do you understand? That was strange fire. Strange fire. And for that slip, they died. Then Moses said to Aaron, and remember Aaron is his brother, and these two fellows laying dead there are Moses' nephews. Then Moses said, and as it is stated in the King James, it says, "This is that the Lord spake." That expression, "this is that the Lord spake," literally means, Aaron, this is what God meant when He said. This is what God meant when He said. And here are two fellows laying on the ground dead, burned, to prove that what God says, He means. Now what does it all mean? God says it means that I will be sanctified. It means that I will be hallowed. And it further means that God has a way, and if you do not do it God's way, you'll not only not make it, but you'll die in the attempt. Let me say that again. All of this lesson means that God has a way, and if you don't do it God's way, you not only won't make it, but you will also die in the attempt to do it your way. Now I want you to go to the book of Romans in chapter 1. Romans 1. Verse 1. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God, which He had promised afore by His prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning His Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh. Now look carefully at verse 4. And declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. Jesus Christ declared to be the Son of God by the resurrection from the dead. Now I want you to listen to me carefully because I'm going to wrap it up here in a couple of minutes. All that I've said leads to these next few words of explanation. The offering put on the altar, the fire came down, set the altar on fire. The fire was to continually be kept burning, never to go out. Anytime anybody was to use any kind of fire in the worship of God, they were to get the fire from the altar. Moses said, "Now, Aaron, this is what God meant when He said He would be sanctified, He would be honored, and He would be hallowed." What's it all mean? This is what it means. God said, "Now, this is the way I want you to do it." So they did it that way. They brought the sacrifice the way God told them to do it. They laid the sacrifice on the altar. They stepped back. And God said, "All right, You've done it my way. You've done it properly. You've done it acceptably. And to demonstrate my acceptance of what you have done and my approval, I am going to receive the offering. And he showed that he received it and was pleased and that the offering was acceptable by sending fire from heaven. Zap! And his pleasure was seen in the fact that he set it on fire and he received it. You understand that? It was the right kind of sacrifice, offered in the right kind of way, and he accepted it by setting it on fire. From then on, the fire was to be kept burning to forever demonstrate God's acceptance of the sacrifice. Did you get that? Hey, did you get it? It was further demonstrated in the fact that because of the sacrifice and because of God's acceptance of the sacrifice, a person could then light a fire and burn incense, and he could come to God and pray. Entrance to God, fellowship with God, conversation with God, prayer was made possible because the sacrifice had been made and God had accepted the sacrifice, and because the sacrifice was made and God accepted it, then I, in the sacrifice offered for my sin, accepted by God, makes it possible for me to come to God and I can fellowship with Him because my heart's right with Him. Do you understand that? Does everybody here understand that? What was the problem with Nadab and Abihu? I don't know what was in their heart, but I do know one thing: they missed the point. Apparently, they missed the point, like a lot of people miss the point today. They say, look, my religion is as good as anybody's religion. You have your way, I have my way, you go your way, I go my way, and we'll all get to heaven by and by. No, you won't. There's only one sacrifice that has been offered to God, that God has been pleased with, and God has accepted it, and God has received it, and God has approved it, and that was the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And when He died on the cross, God demonstrated His approval and His acceptance of Jesus Christ. Because the sacrifice, so to speak, was burned up. He died. He was consumed in death. But the verification of God's approval, the verification of God's acceptance of Jesus Christ as sacrifice for our sin, is demonstrated in His resurrection. And by His resurrection, Jesus Christ is now declared to be the Son of God and the only acceptable sacrifice for man's sin. So that now when you come to God, you must first, as the ancient Jews did, you must first come to the brazen altar, a picture of Calvary. And there you make atonement for your sin through the death and the burial and the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Once you make sacrifice for your sin in the appropriated work of Jesus Christ, then it is that you have reason to come to God and fellowship with Him. You can pray and talk to Him, knowing that you and God are right with each other. Understand it? Nadab and Abihu said, I'm going to come to God my way. After all, my prayers are just as good as anybody else's prayers. No, they're not. The only authority anyone has for approaching God is through Jesus Christ. You understand that? And that word declared literally means a fixed, defined, designated limit. And Jesus Christ is God's Son. Fixed, divine, designated, and limited as the only one by the resurrection. See what I mean when I say hard to outline? But what does it mean? It means there's only one way to God, and that is through Jesus Christ. And unless a person has come to fellowship with God based upon Jesus Christ, the accepted sacrifice for his sin, that person has no fellowship with God, no matter how religious he is. Here was Nadab and Abihu dressed as a priest. They had the priestly appearance. They had the priestly instruments, the incense and the pot. But they reached over and took strange, alien, foreign fire and said, any old fire will ignite my prayers and send them to God. God said, no. The only place where I have demonstrated my approval and my acceptance of the sacrifice, that's the only kind of prayer that I will heed. Understand that? Okay, let's pray.